Hey everybody, I'm back with another Christmas movie review, and this time it will be a Disney Channel original film, Twas the Night, directed by Nick Castle, starring Bryan Cranston as Nick Wrigley, Josh Zuckerman as Danny Wrigley, Brenda Gates as let me start over. Uh, Nick Wrigley, uh, Bryan Cranston. Josh Zuckerman plays Danny Wrigley, the nephew of Nick. Uh, Brenda Gates as Caitlin Wrigley, the younger sister. Reese Williams as the younger brother, Peter Wrigley. Uh, Barclay Hope and Tor Higginson plays John and Abby Wrigley, the parents, and Nick's younger brother, John Wrigley. So yeah, man, I remember this was announced. This came out in 2001, December 7th, 2001. So uh, a couple weeks ago would have been this 23rd anniversary of that film being released. Um, I remember as a kid being through the promotional video or commercial. I like many others original Disney Channel movies. I was kind of hyped for it. I was like, oh, this kind of very, it has the, of course, the cheesy effects, but oddly, there's some level of charm to them. But I was really excited about this. It seemed kind of fun, and it's kind of like, oh wow, I'm definitely going to dig this. Now, of course, I thought it was going to be on the same level as maybe like Halloween Town in terms of like being like a staple for the holiday each year. Didn't rise to that level in popularity, but I remember like, oh wow, I watched this movie almost like the first 3 years after its release growing up. Because like, man, it was really fun, but I was a kid at the time, so I put it on the list for this year to revisit after so long and see, does it still hold up and still hold any kind of place in my heart like it did as a kid. We'll see. Now, the movie opens up in a narration by Danny Wrigley, like they're reciting the night before Christmas, and a cheesy type of rhyming he does. Danny, not being like a delinquent, but clearly he has taken bad influences from his uncle, who pretty much is kind of like a scammer. Not a bad person himself, but he's pretty much like a scammer. And uh, he doesn't really like to, listen to anybody because he doesn't think they offer anything worthwhile for him to utilize, similar to how his uncle, because his uncle seems fun, he's laid back. It's like that fun parent, but not the parent. Because, his parents are very, like normal parents give their kids boundaries, love, but boundaries. But Danny, really understanding certain things he does isn't good for him, especially not in the long term, because it'll land him in deeper trouble if he doesn't change, essentially. He scams his own little brother out of money by giving him essentially junk in his room. And now, the biggest criticism, and I can't recall, but I like to believe that as a kid, I never really liked this character, the little brother. Now, I think he come across like he's like 5 or 8 or something like that, but the kid looks freaking 10 at the very least. But he's come across like talking like with the talking like he got like a list or something, or or like Josh Whitaker's mom. Danny only like it's like again he's a kid. You know, kids talk funny sometimes, but this kid clearly was a good kid, but so gullible. The fact that sure, maybe he falls for certain scams because he's too young to understand, but after possibly learning it a couple of times, he will kind of wise up like the sister, realizing like, yeah, this dude clearly doesn't he can't he shows signs that he can't be trusted because he's willing to scam him out of allowance money, I'm assuming. And of course, uh uh the kid is like, he didn't scam me, mom. I wanted that stuff. And like the parents had to explain to the kids, like, who clearly looks up to his brother, similar to how Danny looks up to Nick. And it's like a dangerous cycle that, Nick is kind of like the patient zero of all this, doesn't realize that his delinquent behavior is kind of rubbing off on his nephew, who then is rubbing off on his younger brother, and it's becoming like a dangerous cycle that's not going to turn out well. And the younger brother is like so naive, the fact that, sure, people have like brothers and sisters that they look up to, but the fact that he said this line is kind of cringy and worrisome. I think that's the point. The fact that I want to be taken advantage of, and plus, like, please never say that to anybody. But it's like, that should have been like a clue to you, idiot. I don't care if you're 14 years old. It's like, hey, maybe, you probably should not, at the very least, scam your own freaking family. Because you never know when you might need them in the future. But then we actually meet Nick, who's being harassed by these goons who he end up scamming out of $30,000. They say he has until Christmas to give them their money back. Otherwise, they're gonna have this muscle-bound Asian man named Elliot to pretty much beat him to the end of his life. So of course he immediately leaves town, hijacking a Santa costume to kind of wear as a disguise, and hightail it to his brother's home, hoping to kind of avoid any the consequences of his own actions. Under the guise of, I'm just visiting the holidays with family and everything like that. And of course, the dad is not too thrilled because he knows about his older brother and the kind of mess he ends up getting into. But then they get this emergency call because they're both doctors. They got to come in on this reindeer flu thing. It was like, God, you couldn't just let it be flu. Why have to be reindeer flu? Just let it be just the outbreak of the flu and let it be that. But they both get called in and realizing, Nick's here, and upon with great reluctance to the father, they have Nick look after the kids while they're gone on call. But I think they cut out a certain part after this moment because I remember there was another scene. They just kind of, I watched this on Disney Plus, and it's kind of like, wait a minute, I know it's not like a Mandela effect. I know there was like an extra scene after this, but when the father is telling the kids to go upstairs and get ready for bed, of course Danny wants to stay up with his uncle, figuring like, I'm 14, I don't really need to have a bedtime. But the father with like a stern voice, like like you should be grounded for the stunt you pulled earlier today. Go upstairs, get ready to bed now. And of course, it's like, is the father hate he had to talk like that because it kind of reminiscent. Apparently, there was some kind of backstory how maybe like the father behaved, to John and Nick, because there's like a comment by Nick saying like, "Oh, but a stern hand, Daddy would be proud." Clearly, they had a kind of like almost like a rough upbringing, but clearly very stern parentage from the father. But like I said, there was like a scene after that moment where these two had this kind of interaction that was cut out. I can't remember what it was, but I know there was a scene, but Disney Plus somehow cut it out or something. I don't know. It was weird. Like, I know that was like an actual scene, but Nick, was going to stay to look after the kids, but then as he's going up on his laptop, the goons end up tracing the laptop, and they're coming close to the location, the exact location. But Nick sent out this kind of virus that's like a 50-mile radius or something that kind of, loses the trail of the goons. But Santa Claus was flying nearby, and that virus that Nick sent out, reached out to him because he was, happened to be flying by, crashes on the roof. Danny and Nick tries to investigate, but then everything paused. Now, even as a kid, I did not like this because clearly maybe it was like a budget reason, but they have the actors, because Santa Claus has this gadget that freezes people in place. Now, earlier there was a comment left by the daughter, who is pretty much like a know-it-all, very, big book reader, clearly. And she remarked at how, like, Santa Claus can't be real because the time it takes to fly in the air, he has to go through Mach blah blah blah, and we will look like statues by comparison if he's going that fast, and all these little like logical, scientific things is supposed to explain how Santa Claus can't make it to every house in the speed that he's probably have to be going. But Danny didn't care for the fact that Caitlin's pretty much darn near about to shatter Peter's imagination and belief in Santa right in real time. So he kind of like shut her up really fast. But Santa Claus has this gadget. Santa Claus being played by Jefferson Mappin, who has a device that freezes people in place. Now, clearly, the actors, whenever this gadget goes off, they just hold still. You can clearly see them like still wiggling a bit because they're trying to hold still. But I've seen other Disney Channel original films that uses freeze frame all the time. And it's like, did y'all run out of the... It has to be a budget situation because it makes no sense. But you didn't account for that when you know that you're going to need to have people freeze in place. And you didn't fit it into the whole budget. But I don't know. Irregardless, it was kind of like, okay, this is kind of dumb. And even as a kid, like, wait a minute, they're still jiggling. It's like you can see their body kind of shifts from their weight because they're trying to hold still for an extended period for this particular scene. It is just like, okay, that kind of takes me out a bit in the story. But Santa was trying to make this his first stop after he finds the source that kind of took out his sleigh from Nick's laptop, trashes the virus so that way, he can regain controls of his sleigh. So he figured, like, okay, I'll just start here. He delivers the presents, but he dropped the. Now, of course, you're wondering where's the reindeer. Apparently, because they obviously don't have the budget for that. But I guess it ties in with the story being Santa trying to start with some high tech gear to give to as like a practice run, essentially, in case something happens with the reindeer, because the reindeer have the reindeer flu too, for some whatever, just call it flu. But it's also a good excuse for apparently Santa to utilize, because you can hear him talking over his little walkie or whatever to one of his elves about it being like, okay, a trial run just in case something happens with the elves. He has a backup, in case he needs to get home quickly or if he's stranded somewhere. Which is like a good excuse to show off, like, a flying sleigh without the use of reindeer. But he drops the sphere gizmo that freezes people in place. It falls to the ground and unfreezes Nick and Danny, who are freaked out. And Santa trips, falls on his head, and knocks himself unconscious. Now, Danny's astonished because, like, oh, Santa Claus is real. That means that now he's unconscious. He can deliver presents. Of course, Nick doesn't really all that care that much, because he sees this as a golden opportunity to utilize this for his benefit. So he convinces Danny to join him under the guise of delivering presents for Santa, but he ends up getting Danny to fly the controls, because it's kind of like a video game gizmo joystick, to fly him to certain houses that happen to be rich houses, so he can pilfer them, because the gizmo also not only freezes people but shrinks items. So that way Santa explains how Santa Claus fits everything in his magic satchel. Even though, why couldn't you just make it magic? Because even with the Santa Claus with Tim Allen, the sack just magically is like a warp zone, essentially. He just pulls things out that he needs. But here he just shrinks all the world's gifts down to miniature size, so it can fit into his sack, naturally. Then he just, once he places them under the tree, he just re-enlarges them, which I guess is pretty handy. But Caitlin and I keep calling him by his real name, but the little Caitlin and Peter wake up and they see Santa Claus. He convinces them he's real, and they try to track down his sleigh by going to a electronics store in order to gain control, trying to find like a high power laptop in order to gain control of the sleigh. Meanwhile, Nick and Danny, while Nick is pilfering the place, Danny looks up on Santa Claus's onboard computer and looks up his name and sees that he's on the naughty list, and he's kind of like taken aback. I was like, why would you be all that shocked by the fact that, because you probably had done some stuff, maybe not like criminally or, like you didn't strangle no cat or anything like that, but it's the fact that you scamming people. You don't think that is inherently a bad thing and it would put you on the naughty list by default? But then Nick kind of convinces him that, like, who's Santa Claus to judge? He's freaking Santa Claus. It's part of his freaking job. It's to determine who's naughty and nice. But uh, he convinces Danny that Santa Claus doesn't know what he's talking about because, uh, look, you're delivering presents to good kids while he's like unconscious, like has a mouth for something. Uh, uh, so they continue on, and then they run into a little bit of manual, electrical trouble when uh, Caitlin tries to use the store's laptop to regain control and steer the sleigh back to the house, but Danny switches the computer on and off to uh, give them back control, which disappoints Santa and convinces Santa, okay, this is the last straw. I'm going to put, like his uncle, I'm going to put Danny on the naughty for life list. And of course, the little brother tries to speak up for Danny, but it's like, kid, get a clue. It's like, it got to be a good explanation. And it's like, wow, denial at its finest. But then, as Nick and Danny enter the domain, well, first they go to this home because they go to these more affluent homes. One of the homes is a black family that the kid who kind of looks like a nerd, but apparently he has some type of anger issues. So Danny sees this on the computer and decides like, oh, well, I'll just give him this punching bag just to relieve, instead of pounding on kids, he can just, relieve that tension into something positive, which Nick, thinks is very, you find that, admiration and kind of proud of him for thinking outside the box. Then I thought, wait a minute, these presents are specifically given to specific people. Somebody else was probably meant to have that punching bag, but you just retroactively decide to give this to this kid who was on a naughty list for a reason and not meant to have a present. Now, given the fact that he's rich, I'm pretty sure he's not going to be without one. But Nick has a heart-to-heart with his nephew. Explains that he kind of wished that, Danny was calling shots at the North Pole and delivering presents, because you actually see beyond just the surface level good or bad. Because when Nick was a kid, he wanted this Jimi Hendrix signed electric guitar, and he thinks to himself how like things probably could have turned out different for him. He could have been on the road. He could have made something of himself if he had that particular guitar. But he just doesn't probably take a responsibility for himself, realizing he probably not meant to get the guitar because he didn't deserve it, because he was behaving badly as a kid, according to the brother. So they end up going to this other more affluent house, and Danny witnesses him pilfering people of their items, and he's just beside himself, couldn't believe that his own uncle not only lied to him but scammed him outright, convinced him to go on this little joyride thinking they're gonna be doing something good, but it's only an excuse to just steal from people on Christmas, no less. And Nick taking the spherical gizmo that freezes people to utilize to rob more people. Danny just resigned to go back home because now he's like, I can't even trust my own uncle. It's like, what people said about you was right. It's like he shattered completely his delusionment. And I kind of wish that kind of happens with Peter, because he just got this, like, of course, I know he looked up to his brother, but he doesn't have to be that dumb of a kid. It's like, he can say, like, I admire you, Danny, but sometimes you can do very bad things. Something akin to that, where it's like he can still admire his brother, but he's just also not completely dense to the fact that he done some really bad things. Anyway, Danny ends up back home, and of course Santa's disappointed in him. The sleigh is pretty much like, ruined after the joyride that Nick and Danny been on with it. So it can't be fixed because all the stuff that they need is at the North Pole. And it could have gotten some stuff probably at the electronics store or something like that. But everything is closed on Christmas Eve night. And they definitely ain't going to get nothing on Christmas Day. So for the time being, they're stuck. But I still got a laugh out of this, where the mansion still has people frozen in place. And Nick was fooling around with people, moving things around. Kind of like Quicksilver in the X-Men movies, moving things around and causes like this massive chaos. And of course, we don't get to see it, but because everybody's frozen in place, Nick kind of like messes with, like tosses the sphere, and when it lands in his hands, it unfreezes everybody. You hear all this crashing and all this other stuff going on inside, so he starts running off. To this day, they still get a chuckle out of me. I thought that was a very funny gag. We don't need to see the chaos inside. We can just use our imagination and infer all the stuff that's going on. So he's waiting at the bus stop, and he's having this kind of moral quandary. The fact that the one kid that believed in him, he ended up betraying, and he kind of like having this kind of self-reflection. Now, because he's disguised as Santa, the goons that has been tracking him down knows that he's in a city, but they don't know the exact location. They managed to get location. It took them a minute, but they asked for directions from him, not realizing he's Nick. So Nick realizes that since the goons are going to his brother's address, his family's in danger. So he goes back to the house. And the goons threaten Santa and the kids, not believing that Nick is not there. Nick does show up and utilizes the gizmo to shrink Elliot. So now he's less threatening. Freaks out the goons, and these nerds run away. Kind of very easy fix. Nick apologizes to Santa and apologizes to Danny for his behavior, and realizing it's negatively impacting the people he loved the most, and it's darn near got them hurt at this point. Then realizing that Santa needs a laptop to connect everything and be able to actually take off, and so he can still continue his job for that night. Nick gives him his laptop, the most cherished thing he had in his possession, in order for him to continue his sleigh ride. And I really don't like this portrayal of Santa. He's very God, what's the word? He's portrayed like you would see him in those old stop motion Christmas films. Like, like thinking he solves everything by tickling people. Like, it's like you try to do that on Elliot, it doesn't work, and it's like it's just that mindset. It's like probably works for that world and not in this world when it's more like modern at the time. Where it's like, yeah, you can't solve everything by tickling, and even with Tim Allen can probably throw hands a little bit, or you at least use some magic to like defend himself. Here, this dude, like, I don't know. Okay, and he's so like not tech savvy at all, which I understand to a certain extent, but you know, you don't even know what a trash bin is on a desktop computer. I don't know. I don't really care for this version of Santa Claus personally. But the next day, Christmas morning, everybody's opening up presents, but somehow Nick also got a present, which is the Jimi Hendrix guitar that he always wanted. So he jams out in front of the family, but also let them know that he's going to sell that in order to pay off the debts that he owes. And so while Nick and Danny learned their lesson, everybody celebrate Christmas together as a family, and that's where the movie ends. Now, does it still hold up for me? Well, yes and no. Now, of course, there's still stuff that I acknowledge even as a kid that still kind of puts me off, like the way they have to freeze people, which it doesn't seem like actual freezing in time. But I also don't care for this version of Santa. It seems kind of even cheesy, more cheesy than a Disney original channel movie would warrant. But most of the characters, especially Bryan Cranston and Josh, are probably the biggest standouts for me. I love the dynamic between the parents and the children. It seemed like a real family, especially that show of emotion. I felt that from the father when he had to be stern with his kid. It's not like it's like how I felt with Smart House when I reviewed that a couple of months ago, which, by the way, check that out. Give my thoughts on that. Whereas actually we see like there's not no howdy do, kind of quirky. Just because it's a quirky Disney Channel original movie doesn't mean you can't have real parents behaving like a parent would. Of course, a parent will be stern with his kid, especially after scamming his own sibling, and the fact that he's not listening when he's telling him to get to bed, and he doesn't want any kind of backsass. Like, yeah, that's kind of like a real parent-child dynamic that we don't see much of in these type of films. So I appreciate it when I see that kind of a standout. I learned the lessons that's being learned about, like, you're even though you're not horrendously bad, but you can still, like the whole scamming thing may not be the most egregious thing in the world, but it could also impact people that you love. And of course, it all comes back around. Danny had to learn that the hard way, as Santa puts it, doesn't hurt when you're one being scammed now. And Santa Claus retroactively ended up learning a lesson too. I don't know if it's probably needed in this kind of context, but Danny kind of showed that there's more to people beyond just the whole good and bad thing. There is like probably reason, like the whole kid, I don't buy a nerd like him. Of course, looks can be deceiving, but having some kind of anger issues and beating people up at school or getting into fights at school, there's like, probably like some kind of source to it, and be willing to peel back the layers somewhat to give them still presents, but something that can probably steer them in a particular direction so they won't go completely off the cliff. The same way how you see Nick has, because maybe he could have been something if he gotten that guitar and channeled something into something positive, where he probably would have lived a different life. You never know. So there's some good moments in here. You know, like as a kid, I have a lot of pleasure out of watching this film. As I'm older, I still get pleasure out of watching this. It's still relatively fun, mostly because of Bryan Cranston, because we all know how he turned out. Even though he's always been like a big deal, but I don't think like he was like really driving. His name really drove home until uh, that show on AMC that he was on. I didn't watch it. I know Breaking Bad. It wasn't until maybe Breaking Bad that he's like really show off his acting chops. Like seriously, I'm pretty sure people were aware of him, but it's always that particular role that really make him a namesake. Uh, but like he's like the most charming character out of everybody. But you know, I think the little brother was probably like the weakest link in my opinion. But anyway, that was Twas the Night. You know, it was a fun film. Great to show your kids for the holidays. Maybe it'll be their own personal go-to Christmas film moving forward. Probably not in the same degree as maybe like Home Alone, but it's still like an enjoyable film for the family. Anyway, I got one more film to wrap up Christmas movie month, and this one's a doozy. But I will see you all soon. Take care. Happy holidays. Merry Christmas. Happy Hanukkah. Happy Kwanzaa. Take care, and I'll see you all soon. Peace.